Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Fear-Free Passive Investing, your source for all things passive commercial real estate investing. If you're a passive investor, you got to be listening to this show. You got to be watching us on YouTube. If you're not listening to the podcast or you're not watching us on YouTube, make sure you check out both of those. They'll be down in the description. But today's show is awesome. It's with another podcaster. It's with another creator, and his name is Whitney Sewell. And Whitney is an awesome guy. I've known him for several years, and he runs a really successful podcast. There'll be a link to that also down in the description if you haven't listened to it. But Whitney and I talk a lot about the fears that new investors have when starting to learn about passive commercial real estate investing. We are recording this in like early March, and it's going to be just an exciting show for passive investors to listen to, but also active investors if you're in the audience and you are actively investing. So make sure to check out Whitney's show. But with that, let's just jump right in and start talking with Whitney. All right, Whitney, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Lucas. I'm honored to be on your show.
I'm excited. This is going to be a good episode. So you and I met probably, I don't know, probably about 4 years ago, right? At Joe Fairless's conference, and we sat next to each other, and we've just kept in touch all these years, and it's been really exciting for me to watch your career blow up, both with the podcast and with all your deals. So, but for people who might not know who you are, can you just give us like 30 seconds of who Whitney Sewell is and how you got into this?
I can. 30 seconds. Okay, we'll go fast. So, back in 2000, let's see, we'll go back a little further. I was in the military, 2001, joined the military. I just thought it was the right thing to do. It was in March. I had no idea that in just a few short months that our nation would be at war. I'd be sent to Iraq for a year, carrying a machine gun around for a year. I mean, I had no idea something like that was going to happen, right? And then, just praying every day I get to go home. Not everybody in my squad made it home, and so hard times, right? But that, one thing the military gave me was what I like to call a never give up mentality. And so, it's not an option to give up when you're, at war. And so it wasn't an option. So I came home, became a police officer, Kentucky State Police. That never give up mentality still had to show from the way I wore my uniform to the way I just responded to every dispatch. It was very important. And then, I quickly transitioned or actually at that time, I had an income problem, making like 30 some thousand a year. I got married and like, okay, this is not what's best, working every night, weekend, holiday. And then in came real estate. I wasn't raised around entrepreneurs or real estate investors, at all. However, I was looking for some way to supplement my income. And that's what, I don't know, I can't remember if it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad, whatever,
Yeah.
something exposed me just to the wealth that so many people had created through real estate. Quickly bought a couple triplexes. That was in 2009, made a bunch of mistakes, did poor due diligence, trusted the realtor too much. I mean, just like, manage myself, just all kinds of things that I messed up. But I gained my own university there and learned a lot. And fast forward, then became a federal agent. That moved us to Virginia, where I still live now, and kept pursuing small multifamilies or single family, but really got tired of looking for more tenants and toilets. And that, I mean, I just couldn't scale, right? Couldn't build that business or that income that I'd been looking for, and it was going to take forever before I could leave my W-2 position. And so then in came syndication. I couldn't believe I hadn't known about syndication so many years before. And so when I learned about that model, around syndication and just from previous discipline and just the structure of military law enforcement, I learned about syndication. I thought, okay, like I can do this. See other people doing it, like I can make this happen. So we just jumped in completely. We sold everything else that we had as far as rentals, and just committed to the syndication business, and obviously starting a podcast and just jumping in, and we can get into that more. But now, closing or now, 450 units under management, over $50 million, under management, and growing. And so yeah. It's probably a little longer than 30 seconds, but that was a fast version.
No, that was great, actually. And I'm glad you touched on a few different things that I was going to touch on, is that you made the switch from single family, which obviously a lot of people have, up into multifamily just because of the way to scale. Is that fair to say?
It is fair, very fair to say.
So what made it so attractive to you from the single family homes? I know you said you made a few mistakes and you don't have to get into the mistakes, but what was so attractive about multifamily to you?
It was the scalability, but it was also just building a professional business. I love working with professionals. I love branding, building our business. I love, having a professional, just brand and just being a professional myself, having a professional team. I love operating that way, whether it's the way we work with investors or just the way that we operate internally, or just the way that we're represented, as opposed to me, driving every day, to go fix a toilet or to go, fix some roofing or whatever it may be, doing those things, looking for more single family homes, but also just the brain damage of,
Yes.
of single family homes. And ultimately, those triplexes that we purchased, I would say that the biggest loss there, what was the time mentally, also, not just financially, but mentally, just the loss of time with my new bride. I was married just not too long before that, and that put a lot of stress on us. I was also remodeling a house at the same time that we were living in. Wife likes to, and I don't normally bring this up on a podcast, Lucas, so, but my wife likes to bring up the day where I'm throwing a 2x4 across the yard or something, something crazy, because it's stressful,
Yeah.
this, trying to operate those units at the same time. And not that business can't be stressful, but I just love, being able to put structures in place and being able to scale at a larger way, and work with professionals. And that was just a big thing that attracted me to the syndication business.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. I've said it a million times on the show before. The reason that I love the syndication model, and not necessarily even syndication, the large multifamilies, because it's much more like a business than it is like real estate.
Right.
Businesses operate a certain way. They have profit and loss statements. Everything is professionally recorded. It's much more emotional, or much less emotional than single family homes. And I've been there before, flipping houses with my wife. And actually, we had two kids at the time too. And it was so stressful. And it was just put so much hardship on. Don't get me wrong, you can make great money doing that, but it's also a lot more work and a lot less professional than the multifamily or commercial real estate in general, I would say. But with that comes a lot of other problems and a lot of other stresses. So let's talk about the fears that you had when you switched from single family to multifamily. I imagine you had some sort of trepidation when you got started. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, this is I mean, my family is in this 100%. It's a family operation, and not that they're in real estate, but they're supporting me in a big way. And so when you talk about like fears, and I'll back up a little bit and say, when we made the transition to the syndication, we were pursuing large multifamily. I had a different business also at the time. I had a few small rentals up to like a 15 unit, and then had another business. I was actually training horses professionally
That's
on the
right.
side, which
I
most people
remember
don't
that.
know that either. It seems so crazy, right? But just a passion of mine is riding horses since I was a little boy, and became really good at it. Was doing clinics and lessons all over the country, and I say that just to say, when we decided to move to the syndication business, we sold our farm and we sold everything related to that business. And so I built a brand there as well, and not as big as I have now, but people were beginning to know me really well. And so I decided, though, for me to be able to do this business well, that I had to just burn the bridge. I had to just cut everything else off. And so I could just completely focus on this and just give it 110%. And for me to be able to do that, I had to just cut everything else off. So my wife and I decided that it was best to sell our farm and everything related to the horse training business. And we actually downsized. We moved into a house in town, which is I like to say, we're not city folk. We love being out in the country, but it was a sacrifice. It was a big sacrifice for us and for my wife. But it was necessary. And so it was, there was fear there, right? Selling our farm, selling, everything, saying, okay, we're going to do this, and we're going to go make this happen. But it was still that never give up mentality, saying, okay, we're going to move forward and we're going to go make this happen. And we know there's maybe a setback or two, whatever. We hope not, but obviously, it's just not an option to turn back. And that's what we had to do. So that, I mean, that was some fear there, but we just said, okay, we trusted the Lord in that and just said, okay, we're selling our farm. We're moving forward. We were also starting our third adoption process at the time. So there were just all kinds of things happening right then. Right. But we knew to be committed to growing this business and being successful, we just needed to cut every other distraction off. And so that's what we did. And that was somewhat fearful. Yes.
Great advice. Anyone who is going through that, and I'm sure everyone's been at a point where they've been at a crossroads, whether they should continue down that road or keep going, or start a completely new path. So let's talk about that new path for you. Obviously, LifeBridge Capital is part of this, but you also have a phenomenal podcast. Let's talk a little bit about that. And how many episodes are you up to? About five? I think you were saying 530.
Yeah, I just recorded 530.
That's incredible. So let's talk about that. What have you learned from the podcast? Give me the top 2 or 3 items that you've taken away that have helped you in your business.
I think more than anything, it's been like personal growth, just from the podcast, from being able to speak to so many individuals. So a lot of people will say, well, what have you learned? And what has that one thing be? Honestly, I mean, like, it's hard to remember that many shows, of course, and 1 or 2 things. But ultimately, I get to ask the guest exactly what I'm needing to know right now in my business. Like, I have so many experts on, so many attorneys, and I get to say, what about this, and a lot of times that may be something I'm dealing with right now or trying to figure it out. Right. Or other operators that have been doing this longer than me, and really getting their opinion. But I would say the biggest things, though, the podcast did, though, was it made me scale. It made me think bigger. It made me build teams, and it made me grow professionally or just personally. Made me become a better speaker, which I'm still working on. It's not great, but still working on that. But it just made me grow personally in so many ways. But one big way that is talked about often, but probably not often enough, is just your network. Just all the conversations you get to have with so many people that are way ahead of you most of the time. Not always, but I learned something from everybody that comes on the show. And so, and I get to dig into things that they're doing and ask questions. And how did you get there? Why did this happen? Well, tell me more about that. Like, I want to know more, Yeah. And that I get growth. Like, every day it's my own university almost.
Mm-hmm. So I would say probably about 90% of this audience is passive investors or folks that want to passively invest. Over that 530 some episodes, give us a little bit of takeaway from maybe the operators you've interviewed or potentially the people who have passively invest. What's some of the common traits that those people have had to get over that fear? Maybe just jumping straight in on their first syndication or maybe their 20th. Anything that you can offer someone who's on the fence about passively investing, perhaps?
Sure. We've done lots of shows and different operators have talked about how to vet other operators, right? And we've heard shows like that. We've heard, we know those questions that we should be asking and, how conservative are they? What's their track record? All those things we all talk about all the time. But, getting started passively investing, I like to tell people, like, invest the minimum. In like 2 deals, maybe with 2 different operators, vet them. Yes. We don't have to go into all that unless you want to, but, ask the questions, but talk to many operators. Ask, have a little list of questions and just talk to many operators. You are going to learn a lot just by having those conversations before you feel obligated to invest with any of them. Especially like in the times we are right now, there may be more people looking at real estate. However, they're still leery to invest. What's going to happen over the next few months with this coronavirus, all this stuff. What's our the market going to look like? However, talk to many operators. What are you doing right now? How's your business plans changed? How were you conservative before? Everybody's going to say they're conservative and that they underwrite conservative. Everybody's going to say that, but actually get some numbers to that. Ask them what their assumptions was. Ask them about their reserve budgets. Ask them about, before this happened. And then, ask how their plans have changed now. This gives you some more questions to really find how operators planned for the these things that we couldn't plan for, that we kind of should be planning for to some extent. But now's a great time to vet operators and say, okay, tell me about a recent property. Tell me how you underwrote it. Tell me what's happening now. Tell me how you're communicating with those investors now that kind of everybody across the country is potentially in a hard spot, and we're having to make some hard decisions here. to make sure that we're going to be able to keep operating these properties. And so it's a great time to be vetting operators and to jump in to say, okay, to find that operator, and then to say, okay, I want to see the next deal. And then I want to see, how your underwriting or the assumptions or whatever your projections match what you just told me. And how are we prepared to move forward when this happens again? Like what's happening now in the market.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are recording this on March 23rd, and it probably won't come out for a couple weeks at least. And maybe I'll move it forward just because of this is relevant to what we're talking about, because the coronavirus is scaring a lot of people right now. And we were talking before the show started about how I personally have a raise coming up where I'm going to see how investors are actually responding to this. I'm of the mindset that this is probably blown a little bit out of proportion. I think obviously it's incredibly dangerous and can kill people, but at the same time, I don't think it's, I think a lot of the market indications are fear-based, which is something obviously I love to look into. I love to think about. Read into your crystal ball. Where do you see the market going over the next 18 months or so? And a secondary to that, how are you changing your business model to adapt to it?
Great question. And I wish I wish my crystal ball was working, but it's not. And so ultimately, I feel like our underwriting and our things that we're doing to protect ourselves against these, it just has to be happening all the time. It's not something that really changes now. Are we going to change our underwriting some? Well, I bet everybody's going to change a little bit, but ultimately, we were planning for something like this potentially within the next couple of years anyway. And I just like to put that out there. There's people who were underwriting at like 4.5% rent growth in the markets that we're in, and we still said, nope, we're doing like 3% or less, like underwriting. It's great if it's more than that. We've already experienced more than that at other properties, and so we could have, and we probably could have said, okay, we know this business plan is going to work because we've already done it, but we still said, nope, we're keeping it down here where we feel most comfortable, and if we can get it up there, great. But when something like this happens, we can pull back and we're okay. Also large reserve budgets. You and I were talking about this a little bit. We started from day one with $1.5 million just in a reserve budget, just for something like this, and we had planned that before this ever came out, and so I'm so grateful that we did. And I think, is our business plan going to change? Well, of course, and so over the next year, I can see, we're planning for, a lot worse delinquencies than probably most, have thought about. We were already planning 30% vacancy potentially in the first year. We were already doing that before this all hit. And so, and I'm so glad that we did. And so, I'm so thankful that we accounted for that way ahead of time. And potentially now, we don't know what that's going to be. And I think everybody's going to have to wait a couple months probably before we know just how it's going to affect all of our properties, and how many tenants are going to be without jobs. And so even our management companies have gone around to confirm, like, who are the employers of all these tenants? Do you see yourself losing your job? Like, let us help you. Like my business partner and I are thinking of ways to be able to help our tenants. Not just sticking it to them, or regretting that we can't kick them out, because ultimately, where are they going to go? Where are they going to go right now? And so we're not just focused on kicking them out. We really want to focus on ways to help them. And do I know what's going to happen 6 months from now? Absolutely not. I hope that it's, I've heard some people in the market that understand a lot of this, that I trust, that seem to understand a lot better than I do. They talk about it being like a V, just a really quick dive down, but then it's going to come back, and I don't know that, instead of like a U, like maybe like 2008, that it's going to go, but, they call it a really deep V. So it's going to go, they expect it to be really bad, but it's going to come back a lot quicker. And so, we have to be able to weather the storm, and we have to be able to, make sure we can afford to keep operating. And so that may mean not sending out distributions like we had hoped, but if it means not having to give up the property, well, okay.
Yep.
Most lenders want to work with you, and I would encourage you to be contacting, lenders right now as an operator. Now, you said most of your audience is passive investors, but hopefully you're your operators are contacting their lenders and saying, how can you work with us? We want to work with our tenants. What can you do? And I would encourage you to like pass that along. If they give you a month or two, pass that along to your tenants as well, to help them also. But I would encourage you, as a passive investor, like, don't be discouraged because your operator may say that we're going to skip a distribution, 1 or 2 or 4. It's more important that these properties stay operating and that your operators have some cash in the bank. You do not want them to get completely depleted, because it's, what if the bowler goes out at the same time? We want to be planning for that, and we are. But
yeah,
go ahead.
No, that's phenomenal advice, especially with regards to the passive investors. Don't be discouraged. Don't be fearful, just because the sponsor shuts off distributions. I wouldn't worry about that at all. Only with the large caveat being that if you did your due diligence right when you invested with that person and they actually truly did have conservative underwriting, I wouldn't worry about that, because most people, myself included, are shutting off distributions just because we don't really know where things are going to go. We'd rather be in a heavy capital position to be able to weather that storm, to be flexible, to be able to be nimble. Like you said, if something else happens at the property in addition to all this, you don't want to have to call a capital call just because you wanted to keep distributions going. Now, obviously PPMs are all different, but at least in most cases that I've seen, you'll be caught up to those distributions too. So I wouldn't worry about that. At the end of the day, there's not a whole lot you can do anyway. So why be scared of something that really is going to happen no matter what? So
unlike the stock market where you just lost,
yep.
so much, yet you still own something over here. We still have a business that we're operating. So anyway.
No, that's perfect. I think that was what I was trying to get out. I wouldn't worry about it. I wouldn't worry about it at all. Now that being said, I am worried. I'm stressed, because we have no idea what's coming. Sure, we did all the conservative underwriting. We have a large reserve budget. We have good occupancy at our properties still, but we're planning for large vacancies. But nobody really knows what's going to happen. So, we'll see, right?
Right. We will. No doubt about it.
Now, I want to close out just by giving you a few minutes to talk about everything you're doing with adoptions and LifeBridge Capital, and maybe how you've come to that decision too, because I think it's really great and it's something I look up to a lot.
Well, thank you for that. When my wife and I moved to Virginia, we were listening to a pastor talk one afternoon. He talked about how they had adopted a child and how there were over 160 million orphans in the world. And so, 160 million orphans, if you can imagine that, that's almost like half the size of the U.S. population.
Wow.
Okay. So my wife and I had only been married a few years, and we had never discussed adopting before. But on our way home from that, all we could think about was, why would we not? Why would we not adopt? And so 2 years later, our first son, Samuel, comes home from Ethiopia. A year after that, our second son, Elijah, comes home through adoption. And just a few months ago, our daughter, Eden Joy's adoption became final as well. And so, our family has been just extremely blessed by adoption, and our children and just what the Lord has done. But it's not been easy, and so it's a massive financial commitment, and just the process is extremely difficult, it seems, or it's more emotionally tolling than anything. But we talk with lots of families who are looking to adopt, and when I say it could cost $40,000 to $60,000 to bring this child home, a lot of them just say, "Well, Whitney, that's more than I make in a year." And so they're just done. They just stop. And so LifeBridge Capital, that's where, from the beginning, we wanted to create this. We're in the process now of building the nonprofit as well, where we can help those families. And we've committed half of our profits to helping these families through the adoption process. And so that's where, if these families will commit to bringing a child home to adoption, we want to be able to help them financially as well. And just helping them through the process, whether it's emotionally or just with the connections that we have, in that process now, and just from being through it 3 times internationally and domestic. And so that's our big why, our big mission behind LifeBridge Capital.
That's great. It's so nice to know There's people out there that are willing to take that sacrifice and adopt children. I know of several people that have done it, and you're right. It's emotionally taxing, right up until it's a roller coaster too, I would imagine.
Massive roller coaster. We even had a failed placement. So if you can imagine being matched with somebody for a long time and then, not going through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gosh. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your advice. If you have any advice to give in this last question about anyone who might be fearful about taking that first leap, especially right now, what would you say to them?
First leap, investing in real estate?
Yeah.
I would say wait a couple months at least.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
I would wait. I would wait a few months. I think there's going to be great opportunities. Okay. And I think maybe those may come in different ways than you may even be thinking now. There's going to be potentially partnership opportunities, I think, that you hadn't thought of. People that didn't underwrite conservatively or maybe do proper due diligence, and maybe they've been getting away with it for a little while. Now, all of a sudden, there's some things are going to change. So I think there's going to be different opportunities, even sub-markets potentially that may be better to invest in now, or eventually in the near future that you weren't so sure about before. But it's just going to create exposure to those who didn't have good processes in underwriting before. Okay. And so I just think, as far as getting in right now, I'm not fearful for investing over the next year in real estate, but I'm personally probably going to wait a couple months, or just see what happens, or if I've already got a great relationship with an operator and I've already been investing with them, then maybe I have a few more questions now, but I'm going to trust, I'm going to trust their business plan, and I'm still going to vet it like normal. But I wouldn't be afraid to invest with somebody I already have a relationship with potentially. But otherwise, if I don't already have that, I may wait a few months and just see, let some of this either cool down or see if it's going to get a lot worse.
Yeah. Great advice, Whitney. I completely agree. If people have questions or they want to get in touch with you, where can they reach out?
They can email me, Whitney at LifeBridgeCapital.com, or they can call or text 540-585-4338. LifeBridgeCapital.com.
And that has a link to the podcast as well, right?
There, yes, you can find the podcast on there as well. The Real Estate Syndication Show, you can find it on any platform.
Yeah, if you're an active investor, I definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't already. Whitney, thanks so much. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Lucas. Thank you very much.